one of my very earliest pieces called Interruption Overture. It was commissioned by a sixth grade band out in New Jersey, and I lived in New York City at the time. So I went out before I even started writing the piece and just spent the day with the band. We tried aleatoric things and just experimented on stuff, and I got to know them. And then I went back and wrote the piece and came back, and man, the bond and the way they were engaged with it was so fun. And I think back to when I was in seventh grade beginning band and try to imagine I would have been blown away by that sort of day. I mean, I wish I had had that experience. And so I look to create that sort of experience. And I think every composer, when they're writing for educational and youth musicians, should put themselves in that, exactly as you said earlier, what really would engage them, what would connect with them and make them be motivated to stay in music.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the great fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Everything Band is sponsored by Celtic Horizon Arts, the leading tour operator for the arts in the United Kingdom and Ireland. Celtic Horizon Arts hosts bands, orchestras, and choirs from around the world, and they are now taking inquiries for their 2020 Band Festival in Limerick, Ireland. This festival, featuring composer Johan de May, will include clinics, masterclasses, and cultural exchanges. Bands and individual musicians are all welcome to participate and can find out more by contacting Keith Kelly at keith@CelticHorizonTours.com or find out more on Facebook at Celtic Horizon Arts. Now, on to the episode and this week's guest, Steven Bryant. Hi, Steven.
Hello.
Thanks for joining me. You're in Austria right now.
I am out in rural Austria.
That sounds really great. And so you're there for the festival. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. It's called Mid-Europe. It is a week-long, primarily wind band festival held in Schladming, Austria, which is a little town nestled in the Alps, usually a ski town. It's the second week of July, and my wife's family they've run it for many years now. And so I sort of married into it, so I get to help work it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I had Johan de May was on around Christmas time. And Michael Markowski was on in the spring, and so I know they're both there. Are they not both there? Oh, no, I'm sorry, Frank Tekeli is there.
Yeah, Tekeli is one of the guest conductors, primary guest conductors, and Miguel Echegancela is the other one. And then, Michael Markowski has been coming for the last few years. He just, out of the goodness and of his heart, and he just loves to come and be a part of it, so he comes. It's great.
I knew there was some connections. I kind of went out of order. I asked you about the festival because I was thinking about Austria, but I didn't ask you to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Steven Bryant, and I am a composer, much to my, I don't even know the right word. I can't believe it usually, that I actually get to do this for a living. So I live most of the time in Durham, North Carolina with my wife, who is the director of the Wind Symphony at Duke University, as well as the Durham Medical Orchestra, like a 100-piece symphony orchestra of doctors and related medical fields. And then this year started a youth wind orchestra in the area. So she's very, very busy, and I am very fortunate to be married to her. And she's from Austria, so we get to come back here and stay with her parents on their farm every summer and help run that festival.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so where is that in Austria? Just for my own curiosity.
The town, which will not help anybody, is called Eberschwang, which roughly translates to pregnant pig.
That's a title.
It sounds good. Yeah, but I need some beer first to write that one. And it's a little town of 3,500 people or so, probably, and not quite an hour from Salzburg, between Salzburg and Linz.
Oh, okay.
But it's really not an area you would go to if you're a tourist,
All right. So, Steven, if you could tell us your origin story and how you got started into music.
So my father was a high school band director and professional trumpet player and a really fantastic musician. So you, having been a high school band director, understand what it's like, that there are instruments and stuff everywhere and that you're working like 400 hours a week. And so I basically grew up in a high school band room, and my mom did like flag line and the rifles and all that stuff. And he didn't have any assistant directors, but he had like close to a 300-piece marching band. This is the late 70s, early 80s in Arkansas. And so, and he was also an arranger and sort of would have liked to compose. And he wrote a couple of things, but never really got the chance to pursue that. But music paper and instruments and range charts and all that sort of stuff, that was just around the house. And that sort of knowledge was incredible. That sort of knowledge was totally normal to have. And so when I was 6 or 7 years old, I started my own piano lessons. And immediately I loved playing the piano and I hated practicing the piano. So I would make up things all the time, but I was never prepared for my lessons. And by the time I started saxophone at age 12 or 13 in 7th grade, that's when they started band then, they let me stop piano lessons then, which they didn't want to. And of course, in retrospect, they were right. I should have kept playing. And so then I picked up saxophone, but I could already read music. And all the way through junior high and high school, it was very clear I would rather write than play. I enjoyed playing, but I hated practicing. So I could maybe practice 15 minutes, but I could spend 12 hours writing or arranging things for my high school band, for example. So it was pretty clear where my interest was and where my obsessive sort of interest would lead me. And so I majored in composition, music composition, right out of the gate, without any real plan as to how I would feed myself regularly. And I went to Ouachita University down in Arkansas with Francis Macbeth, who was my composition teacher. And he's the reason I went there. And he was an incredible mentor and friend and composer, and really gave me a solid education in writing and the opportunity to write often and get to hear my pieces. But that's why band was so prevalent, because we didn't have a symphony orchestra at the college. It was small, but the band was decent and actually quite good. And they would play an entire concert of student works, not just a reading, but an entire concert, like one of the concert cycles. So worked up and rehearsed every year. So I was smart enough to at least take advantage of that. And I wrote a piece every year I was there. So I cut my teeth on large wind works and not chamber music, as I should have. But that's how it went. But I got to hear them. And so I really got a taste for large ensembles.
So Steven, one of the questions I ask is the influence of directors, either in middle school or high school. And now with your father, he was your high school director, I'm assuming?
So he wasn't actually my high school director. He, because he was gigging professionally at the same time as he was directing high school band. And so you imagine on a Friday night, you do the football game right after halftime. He took off to go to a gig and my mom would finish out the game.
Wow.
And then he'd play a gig Saturday night and he'd play a gig Sunday night, and he'd be back bright and early on Monday morning, teaching. And so after a while that wears you down. So he decided to move down and take over the beginning levels and expand that. And he did that right as I was about to start band. In retrospect, it was obvious he was doing that right as I was about to start. So he was my beginning band director.
Wow. That's really interesting. I mean, that sort of gives you an early education, an early, real clear look at what the profession is.
Yes. And he understood that the strength of a school district started with the beginning band directors and that program. And if that's really strong, then the entire thing has an incredible foundation. And so he really made it his mission to strengthen that, expand that a year earlier. And then he became, coordinator of fine arts for the whole district. And it really flourished under his direction.
Well, that's awesome. What lessons do you still carry from him and in that experience as a musician?
How do I say this? I've been speaking and thinking in German for 3 weeks now, and suddenly I can't do English. His biggest idea or biggest thing was persistence. talent and all of those sorts of things are great, but persistence is what really makes the difference. I feel like I'm still learning that, but composing requires that, especially a large work where you just are sick of it and are tired of it way before you're finished with it. I think that's the first thing and most kind of prominent thing that comes to mind.
Right. So, Steven, most of my listeners who know you know that you were involved with BCM International.
BCM International is Eric Whitaker, Jonathan Newman, Jim Bonney, and myself. And we were all really good friends before we started that. And as many things do, it started off almost as a joke. We were trying to figure out a way to co-promote our works and work together in a way that we could pool our resources. Like, hey, you know this director, I know this director. Let's cross-pollinate, and just help each other promote our works. Now, obviously, even back then, Eric was the most well-known of us. And so the three of us, gained a lot by associating with him. But we were all good friends long before that. And the biggest reason we came up with a name is because we wanted to have a booth at the Midwest Clinic, and you have to have a title, and you have to exist as an entity. So we made it up for that. So the majority of the existence of BCM International was a Midwest Clinic booth. It's not a company. We're each published independently. We didn't go into business together, and there's certainly not any. We're not like a publishing house. We're not trying to have a particular style or integrate in that way. It was just a way to cross-pollinate and help each other instead of being competitors in this business. And then it became this this entity. I hope you can edit out my word stumbles. So all you have to do is buy a booth at Midwest and then buy a website name, and people think it's this grand thing that exists all over the world. It's amazing. But that's all it really was. And it worked. And so we've talked for years what to do with it now, because people still ask us about it every time. But it achieved its goal. We are each quite busy writing music and doing all sorts of things, what we wanted to do. So maybe someday we'll figure out what to do, turn it into some sort of educational outlet or something, but we haven't figured that out yet.
I think it's an interesting story because for me as a composer, and as I look at like the entrepreneurial aspects of being a composer, you guys had this idea to band together and then to, and it just worked so well for all of you. It's a terrific story.
Oh, thanks. It was really fun to do that with friends and to like run the booth and meet a lot of people and really kind of concentrate that and spend a lot of time together, which is one of our biggest goals, is finding excuses to spend time with each other because we're all scattered around the country and around the world.
That's what Midwest is best for too.
It is.
So was there an inspiration for doing this, or did you guys have a model to follow, or did someone just say, hey, let's do this?
I think we just said, hey, let's do this.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so you were all at Juilliard around the same time?
Eric, Jonathan Newman, and I were all there around the same time. I met Jim Bonney, who happened to already know John Mackey, who was also at Juilliard at the same time. But Jim did not go to Juilliard, but he moved to New York right after that. And I introduced him to Eric, and they ended up living next to each other in LA and hit it off really well. Jim Bonney was, in a former life, an audio engineer. He worked for Telarc. He has a crazy varied history, and he's a master of a wide variety of skills, not just composing.
So, Steven, your story, when I listen to your story, it's obvious why you wrote for band. And so that's one of the questions that I was thinking about, but you've sort of answered it. But what is the value of the concert band, if you can kind of put that into a couple of words?
A couple of words. Okay.
I know.
Well, do you mean the value to me or the value to society, or
the value to you, the value to you in your composition career and what it means for you?
Well, first of all, the nature of most bands in America is that it's part of the educational system, whether it's high school or university. And because of that, their audience or customer base is different than a professional orchestra. So that because their customer and I don't really like using that word, but who they're serving are the students playing in the ensemble, not the audience sitting out there listening. Not that they aren't cognizant of the audience, but because of this and because of you don't have to earn a profit, they've been much more adventurous and hungry for new music. I mean, I'm sure there are other explanations. I don't mean to distill it down to one simple-minded explanation, but because of their support for new music and the huge number of ensembles there are in America at all levels, I've gotten to practice my craft over and over and over again and get to hear these pieces brought to fruition and like, oh, okay, that didn't work. Try it again. Not only get to hear pieces multiple times, but by multiple ensembles and multiple halls. And if something doesn't work across all of those, then I know that's me. If something works sometimes with some groups and not others, I'm like, okay, I can really start to see it's because you need strong players down the line in all of these sections or the piece just doesn't work, for example. And so I have learned so much by getting to practice my craft. And, composing for humans, for acoustic instruments it's so time intensive and resource intensive, not just for the composer, but for everybody involved. So I'm incredibly grateful to the band community for making me a better composer.
And so the band is a wonderful ensemble. And as I look through your list of pieces, you have many works that are very long and advanced. Where was sort of your early works for the concert band? And when was that, when did you maybe have a breakthrough, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, the earliest work that is on the website that I'll admit to is called Chester Leaps In. It's 2.5 minutes long. It was originally for two marimbas and piano, and it was something I wrote. I never thought of it as a piece I am writing. It was a diversion because I was totally stuck on another piece, and I needed something for my lesson with Cindy McTee while I was doing my master's at North Texas. And so I was just messing around and writing this crazy little silly thing. And then I stuck the Chester theme in there. It was just playing incessantly in my head. I get earworms like that. And I couldn't even remember what it was. I just stuck it in there, no reason, and made this ridiculous thing and took it in for my lesson that week. And I said, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where I'm going with this, but this is what I wrote this week, for better or worse. And she said, if you just put a run here and end it on this major chord, you'll be done. So that's what I did. And that became the piece. And then for the original version. And then the next year I was at Juilliard and met Eric, and he said, you know what, you should transcribe that for band. It quotes Chester. And I'm so dense that it never occurred to me. And so during my work study job there, I orchestrated the thing, or bandistrated it. And through Eric, he got it in the hands of William Burrs at Rutgers University and Tom Leslie at UNLV in Las Vegas. And they both recorded it and performed it at the same time. So suddenly I went from nothing to a little piece out on 2 CDs at the same time. And so that was the first moment that it sort of kicked off, and I started having, I guess, what you call a career.
Sure. And, I think most people, at least especially in the younger levels, know you for Dusk.
Oh, yes.
That's the piece to me. That's the first one that came to my attention of yours. That piece is pretty special.
Thank you. Yeah, I have been amazed by the reach that Dusk has had. So just to give you a timeline, it's funny when people say, I love that new piece of yours, Dusk. I'm like, that piece is 14 years old now. So Chester Leaps In, that was 97, 98. So that's 20 years ago. Then you jump forward 6 or 7 years to Dusk. And I almost didn't write it. I was working full-time at Juilliard at that point, and these pieces I was just writing at night or on weekends, whenever I could find a moment. And I'd already written 5 pieces for band that year on commission, which around a full-time job is insane. I don't know how I did it. And so this was the 6th one, Dusk was, and I almost turned it down, the commission, but I'm like, no, I should write it. And frankly, I don't even remember writing it. I think it was 3 weekends, and maybe that's what I need, is desperation and too little time. And then, because I would love to replicate the success of that piece, I don't know how I did it, but it is by far the most performed piece I have, by far.
Oh, sure. And again, I appreciate you indulging me as I ask you a question that composers don't like to be asked about one specific piece, because, of course, you're a sum of all of your pieces.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Do you, I guess I just kind of want to keep talking about your sort of growth as a musician. And as we've gotten sort of, as I look at your list of pieces, we're building up towards your most recent works and some of your bigger works in the past couple of years, especially Ecstatic Waters and pieces like this. Am I getting the timeline right?
Yeah, so Ecstatic Waters will be 10 years old. 10 years ago this summer, I was in Austria, and I actually wrote part of the fourth movement sitting in the youth hostel at Mid Europe at the festival there. That's where we were staying then. And, I write all summer, even over here. It's not like I can just stop. So this fall will be its 10-year anniversary, much to my surprise.
Wow. Yeah, to my surprise, too. It does seem so much more recent than that.
Yeah, time goes by very quickly, I've found.
Sure does.
So that was one of the first larger works. I'd written a piece called Alchemy in Silent Spaces way back in 2000, 2001. But it wasn't until Ecstatic Waters, which I have to say it has succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. Jerry Junkin did it with UT Austin at CBDNA in 2009. And, it was the perfect storm of everybody I'd ever want to be in the audience, hearing it played impeccably well in a great hall by amazing players. So, I got my dream came true. And that has led, I think, to, I would say that's an inflection point in my career, looking back 10 years. It certainly took off a lot more after that. And I think my feeling is that conductors started trusting me to write larger works. And so if you look in the last 10 years, I've written all of these really big, more involved works, some of them incredibly difficult, like the Concerto for Wind Ensemble. And I don't know if I would have been able to compose them before then. And even if I had, I don't know that anybody would have taken the chance on, a 25 or 35 minute piece that it takes all of their resources and rehearsal time. That's a lot to ask. And so they need to trust first that you know how to handle the ensemble and architecture and compose first before you dive into a really big work.
I want to talk about, I'm looking at your catalog. You also have a lot of shorter works, and I noticed that you're not afraid of writing things that are very short. And that's interesting to me as a composer. I like the fact that you're fearless with that.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I've become more conscious of it. I would say last summer, I had a premiere of this piece, Miniature Suite, about a year ago. And I specifically set out to write 5 miniatures. And what I've discovered is that it's much harder than I thought it would be. I've gotten used to these sprawling works where I take an idea and I play with it and develop it in over 20 or 30 minutes. Now I have to present an idea and bring it to some sort of completion and do it within 2 or 3 minutes at most. And in the slower works in that miniature suite, I still went over. It's like they're 4 or 5 minutes because I don't know how to, I just like to stretch out. And so it feels in a way compressed, but it's also really fun because you get around okay, now I've got to develop this idea and the architecture needs to work. And you just present an idea, bam, it's done. And it's really satisfying also to put a double bar on things more quickly than every 8 months.
Sure. I write lots of grade 1 and 2 band music for kids. So lots of double bars.
Well, I would love to know how you do that. I have tried to write easier music and it always ends up a grade level harder than or at least I'm told that. I don't know how to judge what grade level the piece actually is. I always think they're easier than they are. But man, a grade 1, how do you write that? I can't figure out how to do it.
I don't know really, to be, I don't know. I get asked that a lot. People say, oh, it's so hard to write that. I actually kind of think it's kind of easy because if I find an idea that I think kids will be interested in, something that will keep them in for a minute and a half and maybe make them really want to keep playing their instrument, I just go with it and I just make sure it's really concise. It's almost like writing a pop song in a way. You're just kind of looking at like easy refrain forms and things like that.
Oh, I'd love to be able to write pop songs that were good.
Yeah, no kidding.
I wrote really cheesy bad ones in 8th and 9th grade for girls that I was too shy to talk to, but I rapidly realized that I should not keep going down that path with the songs.
Yeah, well, I think you're on the right path, Steve.
Thank you.
So, I want to talk about this notion. I ask lots of my composer guests about the idea of being self-published versus commercially published. And now you're someone who's pretty vocal about staying self-published and keeping your copyright. And maybe a little bit about that decision and then what you think the value is of that.
Yeah, a lot of that came from, I was in the right place at the right time. The composers who were about my age, came of age just as music notation software reached a maturity level where you could actually engrave your own music at a decent level. And then the internet and the advent of PDFs and all of this technology and infrastructure was born right about the right time for us to take advantage of it. And so that once that piece was in place, I think it became doable. But for me, the biggest reason to be self-published is I retain the copyright control. Just the notion that if I wanted to arrange one of my pieces for another ensemble or reuse some of the material, that I would have to get permission from my own publisher to do that seemed so ridiculous that I don't, if I want to play with, I spend all the time writing the material. It belongs to me. It feels like it's mine, and I can't imagine signing that over. So that's the number one reason. And then also again, much to my surprise, I make a living writing music. And I think a big part of that is being self-published. I get to keep a much larger portion of the money. Now that means my day job is myself. There's all the administrative stuff, getting music physically printed, getting it delivered to people, making sure they get invoiced, making sure I actually receive a check, all of that day-to-day stuff. For anybody out there who's listening, a composer who wants to be self-published, you need to be cognizant of how to run a business and what's involved and how to stay on top of that, or else you're not going to get very far regardless of how good the music you write is. People, if they order stuff from you, they want to get it, and they want to get it in a timely fashion. And then you got to make sure you actually get paid and follow up. And then there's taxes, which is a whole other story. So there's a lot of other moving parts. It's not just me floating around in La La Land writing music all day and everything's wonderful and peachy. It's amazing, and I love my life, but you have to be ready to do those other pieces. And I can handle a spreadsheet, so I kept track of it for many years, and until I finally reached a point where I could hire my assistant, Sarah Meals, who has been amazing. And now she's broadened her what would be the word, stable of people, I guess, to include a lot of other composers. And it's really turned that into a business. And so she's been fantastic. When it finally started to spin out of control, where I couldn't handle both, I think it was while I was writing the Concerto for Wind Ensemble, actually, I started losing track of who had paid me or what was going on in the outside world. I was so deep in that piece for 10 months that I realized I needed help. But that took many years to get to that point where I could afford to and justify hiring someone else to help. Until that moment, I did it all myself.
It's interesting because one of the things, this is a huge amount of time. How do you manage that as far as setting out orders? Do you do that through a third party, or do you do that all yourself?
It's split. So some of my earlier pieces, including Dusk, are distributed by Hal Leonard. Now, from the customer's end, that looks exactly the same. They don't see any difference whether Hal Leonard is the publisher or they're the distributor. For me, they're just a distributor. They physically get the music to people, but they don't own the copyright. But they do warehouse it. So for some of those pieces, I actually hire them to print it. If they were my publisher, they would be paying for those printing costs. But since I'm self-published, I have to pay for that out of pocket. They'll hold it in the warehouse. They'll sell it to retailers and keep track of it. And then every quarter I get a check. But so there's a long delay there, and they take a pretty big portion. A lot of my other works, certainly the bigger ones, handle directly now through Sarah, or rent some of the big ones out or sell the others. And I've set up a website and where you can order and either buy or rent pretty much all of my music. And you get the option for a lot of pieces with PDF. We've experimented with that, PDF versus paper. And even when you give people an option, a huge percentage opt for PDFs now. But if it's paper, then yes, I have to hire out to a printing company, and then it has to be warehoused somewhere. Used to be, and my closet and the extra room were just filled with music. Now it's Sarah's house, thankfully.
Yeah, because I was going to ask how you did it in Austria.
Well, so that was always a problem until I hired Sarah. Somebody'd order a paper set, and I'm out of the country for 3 months. I'd scramble and I'd ask, like, "Hey, mom," or a neighbor or somebody, or I'd send some to someone to be ready. But otherwise, sometimes I'd have to tell people, "You'll get that in August. I won't be back until then." No, it was a problem, and it took me a while to find a solution for it.
Yeah, you mentioned that you offer PDF or paper, and I'm looking at your Concerto for alto saxophone on your website, and they're the same price.
Yep.
That's interesting that you don't tier that to make up for the printing costs.
So here's my thinking on that. And I've done a lot of thinking about, like, well, should it be less for the PDFs? Because, yeah, I didn't have to pay for the printing of it. But at the same time, I give you the right to print as many copies of the parts as you need. I think you actually get more value with the PDFs. You get the right to print as many of the scores as you need for your own use. You can, you can't distribute them. You can't give them away. But the parts, like however many do you need, it's fine. You don't have to buy more. If you need, well, for that piece, you better not have 36 B-flat clarinets. But, there are other pieces that I've written where the instrumentation can vary so much. Like, here, just print off whatever you need. It's all covered under the license, so to speak. So I think it's a value thing like that. I'm always rethinking it. Being in business, you're always trying to assess: is this the best way to do this, or is this not? But people have seemed to have been fine with it. So I have just left it like it is.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting to me that you would do that. I would almost think that if you tier it, you can encourage people to choose the PDF and then create less work for yourself. But I like that logic, that you get as much value from PDF as paper.
Yeah, that's been my logic. I have also thought about tiering it just to encourage more PDF purchases, but I've been amazed. It's by far the majority of people choose PDF, even when they have paper as an option. Now, it is a little bit cheaper with the PDF because with paper, there is shipping tacked on. With PDF, obviously, there's not. So you do save a little bit of money, but it's not a huge difference.
So, Steven, let's talk about maybe engaging with you. If I were a high school band director, or and you say that you don't write a lot of beginner works, but let's say I was a middle school band director and I really admired your work and I wanted you to engage with my program some way. Is there a way to commission you or have you come in to do a clinic via Skype or in person? What does that look like, your interactions?
Absolutely. And before I answer that, let me say I have written a number of works that I consider for younger musicians and for younger ensembles. But grade 3 seems to be. I've shot for grade 2 once with A Machine Awakes, but I still think it's a little hard for that. But I love working with younger musicians. I mean, I think that comes from my father having been a band director. And yes, I've gone and done both kind of Skype video chats and rehearsals with ensembles of every level. But obviously the best is in person. And I get to travel a lot and work with a wide variety of ensembles, university groups, all the way down through middle school groups. If you're interested in commissioning me or bringing me in or just finding out what that might cost or just trying to figure out the details of it, do not hesitate to email Sarah Meals. You do it through my website, info@stevenbryant.com. And she is very friendly. And you could just say, I'm thinking about doing this, maybe, but maybe this. What do I need to know? What's that going to cost? What's timeline? And she will answer all your questions. You're not committed to anything by contacting us. That's the best way to do it. And she has my calendar and all of that. I am very fortunate to say that I'm booked with commissions for a couple of 3 years right now.
Excellent. And so what does it look like? Let's say that I am willing to wait out those 3 years and I want a piece for my band. What's the process look like from my end?
We try to make it as simple as possible. And I think this is pretty much standard, at least among all of my colleagues. You say, I want X. Usually it's duration, difficulty, and a deadline. If you can come up with those 3 things, like that's what you're looking for, then we can agree on when the piece should be due and like how much time you'd need before rehearsals start. Then we work out a payment schedule. Usually it's half up front when we sign the contract, and the other half is due once you have the score and parts in your hands. And I think that's pretty industry standard. It usually has been. And that's basically it. And we decided, do you want the scoring parts as PDF or paper, or that sort of, so a lot of those little details, but the contract is 1 page long. Try to keep it really short, really direct. I will still own the piece, but the commissioner's name will be on the top. They'll obviously get a set for their use in perpetuity. They would never have to pay for it again, obviously, to play it as many times as they want, and extra scores and all that sort of stuff we can work out. But I feel it's really straightforward. I try to keep it very straightforward. I don't want to get in the weeds in contract law.
All right, Steven. So do you have any general advice you would give to young composers who might be thinking, maybe there's someone who's listening who is a band director who might dabble on the side or might be doing arrangements and might want to think about composing? Do you have any general advice for them?
I think you absolutely should do it. The kind of the fire to put notes together and as I view it, watch the puzzle assemble itself in front of me as I spend many, many hours playing with the pieces. It's an incredibly rewarding experience. It's very, there's not usually much immediate gratification though. So you have to be in it for the long haul, even with a shorter piece. Even if we're just saying a few weeks of composing time, that's still a lot. It doesn't have to be the 8 or 10 months that I spend on some of these pieces. Advice as far as getting the pieces played. If you're a band director and you're writing for a band, then you've got an advantage. You have an ensemble already. And that would be a great place to start, is write for your own musicians. One, they'll be blown away. Like, wait, you wrote this? And you get to hear it and kind of grow from that. And then you have a way to share that with other people. Other composers, young composers, it's hard because you can't take my path and replicate it, because what happened, one, it was my particular path, and two, that's now 20 years in the past and the world has changed radically. And so, I can't say this is the way you do it. I wish I could. But you've got to write the best music you can, and you've got to keep writing all the time. Practicing is not just for performers, and practicing your craft, like I said earlier, is incredibly time consuming and requires the good graces and energy and resources of other people if you're writing for them. But you're not really learning until you hear other humans play the piece. The MIDI mock-up on Finale or Sibelius or even Dorico or whatever program you're using is never going to be like a human being. And that moment of learning is critical to becoming a better composer.
I'd like to take a short break from our episode to invite you to listen to my music at markjconner.com. I am always seeking opportunities for collaboration. If you are interested in commissioning a new piece of music for me, having me work with your students in person or via Skype, or to just say hello, please drop me a line at markjconner@gmail.com or through the contact form on my website. Where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
Yeah, so I was never a hugely competitive person. And so I definitely would draw the line more further away from competitions. I certainly have never been a big fan of band contests and, who wins at music? Well, that's a bizarre question. And same thing with composing competitions when we put pieces in. And I've even been a judge on some of these, and it's so difficult. Like, these are two radically different things. I can't say one is better than the other, much less when there's 16 or 32 I'm listening to. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. So the idea of, for example, a band contest where and I know there's a number of these where they just get notes and remarks, and it's tailored to that ensemble, how they can be better in their own way, seems far more valuable to me than, here's your score and you got a higher score, so you win. Okay, woohoo. That's how I feel about it.
You're very busy. You have lots going on. Your wife is a pretty active conductor. And so how do you achieve a work-life balance?
That is an ongoing learning experience. I must admit, earlier on in the relationship and before that, I would let it consume me. I could write 15 hours a day. I would forget to eat. I just wouldn't go outside. It could take over. I have since learned, Verena is amazing. And yes, she's very busy, but she's also incredibly organized and gets her work done in a very timely fashion and can multitask efficiently. I do not. And so I've had to learn and become better because, marriage is compromise, and it is very, very important to keep that balance, I've learned. And so I try to restrict the time. I write in the mornings is the best time, but I set a boundary on it. It's like, even if it's consuming me, like no, I'm going to stop now. We're going to eat. We're going to do this. We're going to go do this thing. And I just try to be more organized about my time, which is difficult. And of course, she's very forgiving. If I'm on fire or if there's a deadline, she understands, and she has put up with a lot when I've done that. And so I try to make it up to her and okay, I'm not going to talk about or think about composing for several weeks. We're going to go do something else. I don't know that I have any concrete advice. It's just, I'm no longer young. And so I've hopefully learned some things by getting it wrong a number of times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just something that I think a lot of musicians struggle with, band directors especially, composers.
Oh, yes. My dad burned the candle at both ends, as I mentioned earlier, and was just there all the time doing music, whether it was high school band or then playing professionally on top of it.
What are the challenges that you see that are facing music education or the band community or the general music community as a whole as we move forward into the 21st century?
Oh my, that's an enormous question.
It is, and everyone has a slightly different take on it. We all see it from a kind of a different perspective.
Since I'm not in the trenches, actually teaching the students every day, I don't know how much I can offer as far as here's what concrete things should happen, and it's going to be different for each program and where they are in the nation. Some places are incredibly well funded, but as we are all too aware, so many places are way underfunded, not just the music program, but the schools in general. Both my parents were public school teachers, and I think public education is the bedrock of our entire civilization. I can't emphasize that enough. And I think it's not just music education that I'm talking about here, but it's the entire public educational system. I mean, that is how we transmit not just knowledge from one generation to the next, but how to be in a society together. And it's the glue. I mean, teachers are the glue that holds our civilization together. So I think we have enormous challenges on revamping it and redoing it. Not just more money, though that would be really, really welcome and help a lot so that teachers are not buying all their own supplies out of their own pocket. My mom did that all the time. But revamping it as to what we need to learn, civics. I think civics has been cut a lot in North Carolina, where I live, and that just blows my mind. That's learning how the government should function, whether it does or not, but how it should, would be valuable information for every citizen to have. I could just go on and on and on, and I certainly don't have a broad philosophical template for this is what we should do. I'm sort of, I'm sort of reeling from all of it. I don't know how to fix this. It's going to require a lot of people who know a lot and are in the trenches in education, and it's going to be different solutions for different states and different districts. But more resources and paying teachers more so that they can really get the education necessary and go into it and find the wherewithal to be in there doing this incredibly difficult, energy intensive job. It needs to be across the board. I don't think school districts funding should hang upon the real estate values or the taxes. And that seems bizarre to me. I mean, everybody should get an amazing education regardless of, what station of life you were born into. That just seems utterly self-evident to me and bizarre that it's not that way. That's why the question when you ask it it's so enormous. And I kind of go off the rails. I'm not even sure where to start. So my only way in is to write, I'm trying to at least write music that will engage all students, regardless of what music they love on the outside of band class. If I've got them there, and I try to find ways into look, this music moves me in the same way your favorite music moves you. out there. So try to find that same visceral connection to it, at least understand why we don't have to love the same music, but this means a lot to me and I want you to give it all. So maybe it might end up meaning a lot to you too.
What would be the last piece of music that you would listen to or conduct or engage with in your life?
Yeah, something that lasts like 30 or 40 years.
Is it the Morton Feldman piece that goes on for 225 years?
Yeah. Or is it the John Cage piece? Oh yeah. It's in performances in progress in a church somewhere here in Europe. It'll be like 600 years before the next note gets played.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I'll have to say that's a hell of a question, because then you have to face mortality. You're tough.
Oh, well, thanks.
Wow.
I think I'm more asking, what I'm really asking is, rather than give me sort of like what's your favorite and like try to give me a pat answer, maybe a piece that really means something to you in a way. And it doesn't have to be, it can be something really simple.
Yeah. Everything I think of, like, oh, I really love that, but I don't know, is that worthy of being the last one? And I know if I give you an answer, as soon as we stop this, I'm going to think of a far better one. Something.
Of course.
This is sort of a pat answer, but The Rite of Spring is just such an amazing piece of music. I mean, that seems like a hell of a way to go out.
Yeah, that would work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get a lot of answers like Elsa's Procession at the Cathedral, Mahler symphonies, especially people who are conductors.
Yeah.
I feel like that would be like a way to cap a career kind of thing.
That's logical.
From your perspective, and I know that every piece that we write as a composer, they're special to us. But if someone out there who's listening doesn't know who Steven Bryant is, they've never heard of you at all, is there a piece that you'd want them to listen to first?
You know, I'd actually prefer that they start with this little thing that sounds nothing like everything else I've written. It's called Hummingbrrd. I originally wrote it's just all electronics, and you can listen to it on my website. It's about 3 minutes long. And every sound is from my own voice. And I am no singer, but I have great software and suddenly have a 4-octave range or 5-octave range and impeccable timing and all of that. It's fun. It's lively. It's something I made just without it. It was truly in the zone. And I wish I could find that zone more often, but I think I made that whole thing in 48 hours. It's one of those moments where I forgot to eat for a whole weekend. And that's a great place to start. It's also only 3 minutes, so I can hopefully, invite you in, and then you'll want to listen to something else. Because then I would say, okay, now go listen to probably my Concerto for Wind Ensemble or my saxophone concerto. That's the other end of the spectrum. Massive works. But I'm really proud of, again, like Jerry said, playing favorites. I could just start naming off pieces that I'm really proud of, and that's a really great thing to be able to do. But those two, those I think they work like I wanted them to, which is not always the case.
You mentioned Hummingbrrd, and then I realized that I completely forgot to ask you one of the lines I wanted to ask you here is about electronics and band. I spoke with Alex Shapiro for the podcast, and we talked a bit about this. And so you're someone who's noted for using electronics. And what's that like?
Well, the first time I did it on a big scale was Ecstatic Waters, and it was, as we said, 10 years ago, but it was sort of terrifying because suddenly all of my orchestrational knowledge is kind of upended. Like, well, are these sounds going to mesh well? Is this going to sound good, or is this going to totally suck? Is this going to balance? Is this going to work? I did not know. I really didn't have that surety, and but you just go for it anyway. Now I love it on the composing end because I get to fill in the sound world where there's something I'm looking for, and then there's just not a right instrument in the ensemble I'm writing for. So I can create those sounds. But I also try to not let the electronics take center stage, or not very often. I want the ensemble on stage to still be the center of the sound world and only augment or extend it with electronics. So the electronics have to be, actually, I've learned, far simpler than if I'm doing purely electronic music, just because the frequency space is already pretty full. So working around that, the electronics themselves tend to be pretty simple and almost boring, I've found, and that's much more effective in a concert hall with a large ensemble on stage. But I love doing it.
Yeah, it's such a unique thing, and you would think that more people are doing it, but there's really not so many out there.
It's a lot more work, and it's already a lot of work to compose, and then to figure out the rehearsal logistics so that you can start at any rehearsal number, and how do you want to run the electronics? Are they entirely live? Are they pre-recorded? And so do you need a click track? There's just a whole extra world of considerations and that you have to bring into it. So it requires even more time. I'm writing a piece right now, a big one, for Arizona State University for the CBDNA conference at Arizona State next February with electronics. And so I'm already freaked out. That seems way too soon. And I'm not nearly far enough along in the process.
Okay, Steven. So we're almost to the end here. And so is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
Well, aside from that work for Arizona State, I am putting the finishing touches on a piece for the University of Illinois. It's their 150th anniversary of their band programs. And so it's the oldest college band program in the United States. And they commissioned me like 3 years ago. Steve Peterson approached me about doing this. And so it looks like it's going to be 5 movements. I've written 4 of them, and I'm desperately trying to figure out this one more movement, which is actually, I think, going to be the second movement. That will premiere about the same time next February as well, and probably be about 18, 20 minutes long. And that's just for wind ensemble, straight ahead. There's no electronics in that one. So those 2 big pieces are going to consume my whole year. I just finished a piece that was premiered by the Detroit Symphony, commissioned by them. That was last April.
Cool.
Leonard Slatkin. So that one's up. Yeah, I'm incredibly fortunate. I can't be anything other than grateful that I have so many projects going on. Yeah, and then a year later, I'm writing a euphonium quartet and wind ensemble piece, but I haven't even thought about that one yet. I've got too much other to do before I do that one.
Yeah, who's the euphonium quartet?
The Five Quartet out of Austin, Texas.
Oh, I don't know them.
Yeah, they're hilarious. They have some videos. It's more than just them standing there playing. They put on a show. So I think we're going to create something really fun. But we've talked a little bit about it, but it's way too early to dive in on that one. And I should mention, I'm also writing a long-term project for the Pittsburgh New Music Ensemble. They're incredible, and that is going to be off the charts, crazy, innovative electronics. The whole audience might be in headphones. We'll see, but it's going to be truly, truly something different.
Oh, cool. Is that Perot plus electronics? Is that what they do, or is?
That will be roughly what it's for, maybe more vocalists. Mm-hmm. But we're still in the early stages of experimentation with binaural sound and stuff like that. So everything is on the table at this point.
So how can people get in touch with you? I know you mentioned Sarah earlier. Is that the best way?
Yes. My website, which is my name, StevenBryant.com. And that is Steven with a V. And it with an N. Don't go to SteveBryant.com. That is a realtor in Utah, and that is not me. I wish I thought to buy that domain many years ago. So it's StevenBryant.com, and then from there, there's contact. It's an email address, info@StevenBryant.com. That is by far the best way to reach me. I will get a copy of it. Sarah gets a copy of it. Sarah will then tell me, hey, answer this email you forgot to answer. And I'll go, oh, yes, whoops. And don't write me on Facebook or Twitter messages or all that stuff. I'll probably eventually get it, but I usually don't even look at them. So unless you don't need an answer for about a year, that's probably not a good way to write me.
Steve, thanks so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely my pleasure. And I'm glad this worked all the way across the world. And thank you so much for the invitation.